When I was growing up, I always thought my father was going to die. He was always a very sick man. And I remember being about 7 or 8 years old and watching my next door neighbor carry my father's limp 90-pound body down the stairs to take him to the hospital. Again. Growing up with a sick dad really sensitized me to the fragility of life, the temporariness of life. And it made me really interested in knowing how to live my life to the fullest. And so eventually, I got a PhD in psychology. And as mentioned, I eventually formed, with some people who became good friends of mine, the Canadian Positive Psychology Association. Positive psychology is the scientific study of the good life. A huge topic today, happiness. But something really concerns me when I read web pages or books or listen to the media talking about the good life. And that is, I think there are a lot of myths and a lot of misinformation out there about the good life. And so what I wanted to do with you today here is dispel some of those myths and give you a good sense, a good way to understand how to make the most of your own lives. And I think the way to do that is to consider the notion of balance. I think balance is a very effective organizing framework for understanding how to live well. Now, you can notice that if we take one word from each of the 4 ways of thinking about balance that I'm going to discuss, it forms the word mists. And what is a mist? A mist is like a fog. And a fog sort of gets in the way of your ability to see what's in front of you. But if you can keep the idea of balance in your mind, the fog, the mist, disappears. And you can see clearly how to live well. This is what we're going to talk about today. Now, by way of getting into this, please do me a favor. Please think about a characteristic of yours, some positive quality that you're proud of. What really defines you as an individual? Now take another second and think about how that positive quality enhances your life. How does it make you happy? Now keep that in mind, because we'll come back to it a number of times. The first way to conceptualize balance is balance as mid-range. We tend to think that the good life is promoted by having very high levels of positive qualities. We don't just want to be happy, we want to be really happy. We don't want to be optimistic, we want to be super optimistic. But it turns out that that is not necessarily the best way to promote the good life. Every idea that I'm going to present to you today is based solidly on social scientific research. And the research bears out the idea that being extremely high on positive qualities is not necessarily the best way to live. In 2007, there was a study done surveying about 140,000 people in about 100 countries. And what the researchers did is they asked people to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of how happy they were. And then they looked at the relationship between those scores on happiness and various important life outcomes. Now, for some important life outcomes, like relationships, people who had scores of 10 on 10 fared very well. Okay, so in terms of relationships, being really high on happiness, great. But for a lot of other very important things, people with more mid-range scores fared better. It was the people that had more moderate scores on happiness who attained higher levels of education, were more involved politically, made more money. And this is just one example of dozens that I could give you about how the good life is often promoted by having more mid-range scores, not extremely high scores. It's very easy to overdo it. When I was about your age, when I was about 22, I started bodybuilding. I bodybuilt for a while, as you can tell. And I overdid it. I did it for about 5 years. After about 5 years of bodybuilding, I just ached. My back ached, my shoulders ached, my elbows ached, everything ached. It was not good. I had overdone it. I was also not very good at bodybuilding. In the 5 years that I did it, I put on 4 measly pounds. I'm not a very good bodybuilder. You know what I think I would be good at? You know in the Olympics, that event where the girls twirl the ribbon? I think I'd be good at that. Of course, we'll never know because they don't have that for men. It's a little sexist, I'm just saying. So balance as mid-range is important. Think about that positive quality I asked you to think of before. Can you think of how that positive quality, if exercised too much, if you had too much of it, could undermine the quality of your life? The second way to think about balance is balance as synthesis. It is usually not the case that the good life is promoted by implementing one quality, even if it's positive quality, one quality at a time. Usually, we need to balance qualities with other qualities. And again, the research bears this out. In some classic research that was done, researchers were interested in knowing the relationship between emotions and physical health. And so what they did was they had people write essays about traumatic experiences in their lives. And then the researchers coded those essays for the amount of positive emotion words in the essays and the amount of negative emotion words in the essays. And then they followed up with those people to see which ones needed to visit health clinics in the months ensuing. Now, you would think that it would be the people who just had a lot of positive emotion words in their essays who ended up being healthy and not needing to visit the clinics. But that's not what happened. What they found was it was the people who had a lot of positive emotion words in their essays, but also a moderate amount of negative emotion words. Balance. Balance is what promotes health, physical and psychological. Now, we have to be careful how we balance. Balance can go awry. When I was in graduate school doing my master's degree, I used to go for lunch to the school cafeteria with my grad student friends a lot. And one of my buddies loved the school's fried chicken. He would always get the fried chicken. Monday fried chicken, Tuesday fried chicken, it was always fried chicken. But after a long time of eating fried chicken, he decided he was getting a little chunky, and he needed to balance out his diet, eat a little better. And so the next time, it's a true story, the next time we went to the cafeteria, you know what he got for lunch? Fried chicken and a salad. Not a good way to balance things out. Think about that positive quality I asked you to think of earlier that defines you. What other qualities do you think you need to invoke to balance that quality well and promote the good life? And maybe the quality that you considered was honesty. Honesty is a great quality. But on its own, honesty can be a little bit harsh. To live the good life, to build good relationships, you need to balance your honesty with a little bit of sensitivity. Balance in terms of synthesizing all of your qualities is what promotes the good life, not just focusing on one, which, by the way, means the good life is not about just being happy all the time. You have to balance all of your emotions. The third way to think about balance is balance as tempered view. Now, balance as tempered view asks us to put the brakes on and consider for ourselves how the things that we think of as good may not be always so good. And the things that we think of as bad may not always be so bad. It is often the case that there are negative aspects to positive qualities, and there are positive aspects to negative qualities. Think about happiness, right? We think of that as good, and it is good. It's great. But we've already seen that happiness can undermine some things that are important in life. Think about guilt and shame. We think of those as negative. But guilt and shame can lead you, can motivate you to make positive changes in your life, right? Sometimes you have to go through some of the negative to get to the positive. We have to adopt a tempered view, what's good and what's not good. And again, the research bears this out. I think the best example of this tempered view that I can give you comes from the research on emotions. We've been doing research on emotions for decades now, and we know that there are negative aspects to positive emotions and positive aspects to negative emotions. For example, we know that positive emotions lead to a number of negative outcomes sometimes. For example, positive emotions can impair your memory, can increase judgment errors, reduce perseverance, lower politeness, heighten gullibility, increase stereotyping, increase selfishness. And negative emotions can essentially do the opposite. Negative emotions can improve your memory, reduce judgment errors, increase motivation, and so on. So what's positive and what's negative? There was a teenage boy living on a farm with his elderly wise father. And one day a horse arrived out of nowhere. And the boy said, "Father, this is so good. We've needed a horse to help us plow our fields. Now we have this horse. This is awesome." And the wise father said, "Good? Bad? Who knows?" The next day, the boy was riding the horse, and he fell off and he broke his leg. He said, "Oh, Father, I thought this was good, but this is bad. I've broken my leg. Wish we never found this horse." Father said, "Bad? Good? Who knows?" A few days later, some men from the military came by to recruit young men to go off to war and likely die. But they couldn't take the farm boy because he had a broken leg, so they left. And he said, "Father, this is so good that I have a broken leg. I'm not going to die." And what did the father say? Good, bad, who knows? Who knows? We don't know what's good and what's bad. We think we do, but we don't. The tempered view asks us to reconsider what's good and what's bad and be more moderate in how we understand what is good and what promotes the good life. Think about that positive quality I asked you to think of earlier. Can you think of any ways in which that positive quality might have negative aspects to it? Now, what might help you get your head around that question is to consider our fourth and final way of conceptualizing balance. And that's balance as sensitivity to context. Every single positive quality used in the wrong context can be negative, can undermine a good life. The good life is about making sure you think and feel and act appropriately given the circumstances. And again, research bears this out. Consider forgiveness. Forgiveness is a positive quality, right? I think we would all agree. Forgiveness is a desirable trait. It's a virtue. I want my kids to learn to be forgiving. I don't want them holding grudges. Forgiveness is definitely a desirable positive quality. But not for battered women. Research shows us that women who are higher in forgiveness, but in relationships with men who are less than desirable and don't treat those women the way they deserve to be treated, those women who are high in forgiveness end up being less satisfied in their relationships than women who are lower in forgiveness. Those women who are high in forgiveness also suffering more abuse. Forgiveness in the wrong context undermines your quality of life. Now, on a much lighter note, I learned the value of situational appropriateness when I was at the end of my PhD. When you do a PhD, at the end of it, you have to defend your dissertation. So you write a paper, a big paper, for a year or longer, and then you stand in front of a committee and you defend. Essentially, you prove to them that you deserve being admitted to the club of doctors. So one of my qualities that I like about myself is I'm a humorous kind of guy. I'm light and jovial. And so I arrived the day of my defense, and I had some juice, because you're going to talk a lot, your throat gets dry, you want some juice. And so my committee said, "All right, Mr. Gruman, please proceed to defend your dissertation." And I said, "Oh, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. You might be wondering why I have juice on the table. The reason is because I've decided to defend my dissertation through the use of interpretive dance." And I'm waiting for the laughter and the chuckles, and nothing. They're just like, "Please proceed, Mr. Gruman." Like, okay, now nothing really bad happened there, but if that had been a job interview or a situation where people didn't know me, the results could have been much worse. How we act matters. You have to act the right way, think the right way, feel the right way, in the right circumstances. Think about that quality I asked you to think of before. Can you think of any situations in which that quality that you're so proud of would be inappropriate and potentially undermine the quality of your life? I'm pleased to say that my father is still with us. He's not doing well, but he's still around. Growing up with a sick dad really sensitized me to the fact that there was a time in the past when each of us did not exist. And there will be a time in the future when each of us no longer exists. And ask your grandparents, it'll go like that. But between those two times, here we are. And we want to know how to make the most of it. And we should do everything we can to make our lives good lives. This may be the most important balancing act for us to achieve. To remember to bear in mind the difference between being here and not being here. That tends to put everything in perspective. And so my challenge to you is to keep this perspective in mind. Keep a balanced view, and you can't go wrong. If you lose a job, you get fired, well, you'll be upset, but don't get too upset. Mid-range, right? Don't be too upset. And in addition to being upset, maybe you should be a little bit optimistic that you'll find another job, but also perhaps a little bit pessimistic as to how long it might take. And so make sure you leverage your network and make sure your resume is up to date and make sure you prepare really well for those job interviews. Right? That little bit of pessimism, that niggling bit of negativity, that's going to motivate you to do a good job and get what you want. There's that synthesis operating. And you lost your job, but maybe the next job you get is going to be even better than the one you lost. Maybe you'll like it more or make more money. So here's your tempered view. Is it really a bad thing that you lost your job? Maybe not. And if you're going to get a better job soon, then being upset now maybe is situationally inappropriate. You don't need to feel bad. You see how all these pieces of balance work together? And so when you come across information in the media, in books, wherever, that presents you with these simplistic ideas about the good life, just bear in mind that they're likely potentially one pieces of a puzzle, but they're not the whole story, and some of those pieces you come across can lead you astray and actually undermine the quality of your life. Don't be led astray by these simplistic prescriptions. If you want to have a simple prescription to keep in mind about the good life, just remember what we talked about today. Remember that the good life is promoted by maintaining a harmonious balance. Thank you.